The autumn breeze swept through the bustling streets of Manhattan as James walked into his sleek office building, his mind already racing with the day's meetings. At 35, he had everything most people dreamed of: a successful tech company worth billions, a beautiful home, and a loving wife. Yet lately, something had been gnawing at him, a restlessness he couldn't shake. 10 years ago, he and Catherine had been college sweethearts, dreaming big in their tiny apartment. She'd worked extra shifts at the hospital while he coded late into the night, building his startup from scratch. They'd shared instant noodles and big dreams, laughing about the day they'd make it big. Catherine had been his rock, believing in him when even he had doubts. Now, standing in his penthouse office overlooking the city, James adjusted his designer suit and checked his Rolex, a far cry from the second-hand watches he used to wear. His phone buzzed with a message from Lily, the young model he met at last month's charity gala. His heart raced as he read it, just like it did every time she contacted him. "Ready for lunch?" Her message read, accompanied by a photo of her at their usual spot. James glanced at the framed photo on his desk, him and Catherine on their wedding day, both grinning like they'd won the lottery. He turned the frame face down, a gesture that had become increasingly common lately. The past few months had been a whirlwind since meeting Lily. At 24, she represented everything his life lacked: spontaneity, excitement, and a fresh perspective on life. While Catherine talked about starting a family and settling down, Lily spoke of traveling the world and living life to the fullest. His marriage had become a routine. Catherine, still working as a pediatrician despite his wealth, came home tired from long hospital shifts. Their conversations revolved around schedules, house maintenance, and future plans. The passion that had once fueled their relationship had dimmed, replaced by comfortable silence and predictable routines. During board meetings, James found himself sketching Lily's name in his notebook like a schoolboy. She made him feel young again, reigniting feelings he thought he'd lost in the rush to build his empire. Their secret lunches turned into dinner dates, and soon they were meeting whenever they could find time. One evening, as he sat in his home office, Catherine brought him tea, just as she had done during those startup days. "We barely talk anymore," she said softly, placing the cup next to his laptop. "Remember when we used to share everything?" James looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, with kind eyes that had supported him through his darkest days. But something had changed, or perhaps he had changed. The hunger for more, for different, for new had consumed him. The decision didn't come easily, but once made, James moved with the same precision that had made him successful in business. He hired the city's top divorce lawyer, arranged for new living arrangements, and prepared everything meticulously. Their wedding anniversary arrived on a rainy Thursday. Catherine had planned a quiet dinner at home, just like their early days. Instead, she found divorce papers on the dining table next to the celebration cake she'd specially ordered. "I can't do this anymore," James said, watching her world crumble through the steam of her untouched coffee. "We've grown apart. I'm not the same person I was when we married." Catherine didn't scream or throw things. Her silence was worse. She simply stood there, clutching the papers, her medical ID badge still hanging from her neck after her hospital shift. "Is there someone else?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. James nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling hollow even to his ears. "You deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve." As he walked out of their penthouse that evening, carrying a small suitcase packed with essentials, the security guard, who had watched them move in as newlyweds, looked at him with quiet judgment. His phone buzzed again. Lily was waiting at their new apartment, ready to start their life together. He stepped into his Ferrari, the engine purring to life. Through the rearview mirror, he caught a last glimpse of the building where he and Catherine had built their dreams. For a moment, he remembered her laugh when they'd finally made their first million, how she jumped into his arms, both of them crying with joy. The traffic lights turned green, and James drove away, leaving behind 7 years of marriage and a decade of shared dreams. His future beckoned, bright and exciting with Lily. Yet as the city lights blurred past his windshield, a small voice in his head wondered if he was driving toward happiness or away from it. Later that night, in Lily's arms, he pushed away the image of Catherine standing alone in their kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be their anniversary celebration. He had made his choice. Tomorrow, the news would break, and his PR team would manage the fallout. Life would move on, as it always did in the fast-paced world he now inhabited. What he didn't know was that this decision would set in motion events that would return to haunt him in ways he could never imagine, bringing consequences that no amount of money could fix. 2 weeks after James left, Catherine sat alone in her doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound screen in disbelief. Dr. Wilson adjusted the probe, her eyes widening. "Well," she said gently, "this is quite extraordinary. I'm seeing 4 distinct heartbeats." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Quadruplets. The word echoed in her mind like a distant bell. She'd wanted children for years, but James had always said they needed to wait for the right time. Now here she was, alone and carrying not 1 but 4 babies. Back in the emptiness of her penthouse, she curled up on the couch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. The divorce papers lay unsigned on the coffee table, next to a stack of gossip magazines splashing her husband's new relationship across their pages. The young model, Lily, looked radiant on James's arm at some charity gala. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn children, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Years of working as a pediatrician had taught her about the challenges of multiple births, but it had also shown her the incredible resilience of both mothers and children. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen island picking at a bowl of soup, her phone buzzed with a text from James's lawyer. They wanted to expedite the divorce proceedings. Catherine looked at her ultrasound pictures spread out on the counter, then at her phone. After a long moment, she made her decision. She wouldn't tell James about the babies. It wasn't spite that drove her decision, but a deep need to protect herself and her children from becoming a media circus. James had chosen his path, and she would choose hers. Her babies wouldn't be bargaining chips in a billionaire's divorce drama. The next few months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and careful planning. Catherine threw herself into preparing for her new life. She converted the home office into a nursery, painted soft yellows and greens, with 4 identical cribs arranged in a semicircle. Each weekend, she added something new: tiny onesies, soft blankets, and stuffed animals, each in sets of 4. Her colleagues at the hospital became her support system. Dr. Chen, her department head, adjusted her schedule to accommodate her high-risk pregnancy. The nurses fussed over her, making sure she ate properly and rested between patients. They became the family she needed when her own parents, long deceased, couldn't be there. At 6 months pregnant, Catherine waddled through the hospital corridors, her white coat barely closing over her growing belly. She'd chosen to keep working as long as possible, finding strength in her routine and in helping other children. Her patients' parents often asked about her pregnancy, and she loved watching their faces light up when she told them she was expecting quadruplets. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing patient charts, she caught a glimpse of James on the hospital's waiting room TV. He was announcing a new tech breakthrough, Lily beaming beside him. Catherine noticed his new haircut, the designer suit that had replaced his old hoodies, and felt a strange detachment. The man on the screen seemed like a stranger now. Her babies chose that moment to kick, all 4 of them, it seemed, as if reminding her where her focus should be. She smiled, rubbing her belly. "Yes, little ones, I know you're there," she whispered. The future she planned with James had crumbled, but a new one was taking shape, built around the tiny hearts beating beneath her own. The pregnancy became more challenging as she entered her 3rd trimester. Her ankles swelled, her back ached, and sleep became elusive. But Catherine approached each day with determination, making lists, attending parenting classes, and preparing for every possible scenario. Her medical background proved invaluable as she researched multiple births and their specific challenges. Late one night, unable to sleep, she wandered into the nursery. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting gentle shadows on the 4 cribs. She sat in a rocking chair, her hands cradling her enormous belly, and began to talk to her babies. "Your daddy," she said softly, "was once a dreamer with a laptop and a heart full of hope. We were so happy, living on love and instant noodles." She paused, feeling the familiar movement under her hands. "But people change, and that's okay. Because now I have you 4, and we're going to build something beautiful together." At 8 months, Dr. Chen insisted Catherine start her maternity leave. Her last day at work, her colleagues threw her a surprise baby shower. The break room overflowed with gifts, each thoughtfully chosen for a mother expecting 4 babies. The nurses had even created a schedule to help her after the births, offering to take shifts to ensure she wouldn't be alone. As her due date approached, Catherine finished the last preparations. She hired a part-time nanny, arranged for a temporary leave from the hospital, and set up a detailed birth plan. The nursery was ready, 4 of everything arranged with medical precision. She'd even prepared a small hospital bag for each baby, their names carefully embroidered on tiny blankets. The media had long lost interest in James's ex-wife, their attention captured by his glamorous new life with Lily. Catherine's pregnancy remained her precious secret, shared only with those who had become her true family, her hospital colleagues, and a few close friends who stood by her after the divorce. One quiet evening, as she sat completing paperwork for her extended leave, Catherine felt the first contractions begin. With the calm efficiency of a doctor, she timed them, called her medical team, and gathered her hospital bags. As the contractions intensified, she paused at her front door, looking back at the apartment that had witnessed both her greatest heartbreak and her journey to this moment. "Ready or not," she whispered, one hand on her belly, "here we go." She stepped into the hallway, headed toward a future that would be challenging, exhausting, and nothing like she'd planned, but entirely hers. What she didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of a story that would eventually come full circle, bringing with it revelations that would shake the carefully constructed worlds of everyone involved. 5 years passed like a whirlwind of first steps, first words, and countless memories captured in photos that lined the walls of Catherine's new home. The modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburb was worlds away from the luxury penthouse she once shared with James, but it was filled with something far more precious: the sound of children's laughter. The Quadruplets had grown into energetic 5-year-olds, each with their own distinct personality but sharing an uncanny resemblance to their father. There were the boys: Alex, the eldest by 2 minutes and natural leader; Ben, the curious problem solver; and Charlie, the gentle soul who could charm anyone with his smile. Then there was Diana, the youngest by 4 minutes, but fierce and protective of her brothers. Catherine's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. Her pediatric practice had flourished, becoming one of the city's most respected children's clinics. She'd discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, juggling the demands of 4 children with a thriving medical career. Morning routines in their household were a carefully choreographed dance. "Alex, please help Ben with his shoelaces," Catherine called out one morning, while preparing 4 different breakfast plates. No 2 children liked exactly the same things. Charlie was going through a phase where he would only eat heart-shaped toast, while Diana insisted on arranging her fruit in rainbow patterns. "Mom, look," Ben exclaimed, showing her his latest science project: a solar system made from painted styrofoam balls. His eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm she remembered seeing in James's face when he talked about his technological innovations. The nanny, Mrs. Parker, arrived precisely at 7:30 a.m., as she had done for the past 5 years. She'd become more than help; she was family. "Good morning, my little scientists," she greeted, receiving 4 enthusiastic hugs. The children had inherited their father's love for technology, their playroom filled with educational toys and basic coding games suitable for their age. Catherine's clinic had become a testament to her resilience. She'd built it from scratch, understanding firsthand the needs of parents with multiple children. The waiting room featured a creative play area, and she'd implemented a scheduling system that accommodated families with twins or triplets. She knew better than most how challenging it could be to manage multiple children's appointments. One afternoon, while reviewing patient files in her office, she overheard her staff discussing the latest tech news. James's company had launched another groundbreaking product, but rumors circulated about trouble in his personal life. His relationship with Lily had reportedly grown strained, the age gap and different life goals finally taking their toll. Catherine felt no satisfaction in hearing this. She'd long since moved past the hurt and anger, focusing instead on building a life that made her proud. Her children were her triumph: kind, intelligent, and curious about the world around them. The Quadruplets attended a progressive private school that Catherine had carefully chosen for its nurturing environment and emphasis on individual development. Their teachers often remarked on their exceptional abilities. Alex showed leadership skills beyond his years, organizing his siblings and classmates in elaborate playground games. Ben could solve complex puzzles that challenged even older children. Charlie had an extraordinary emotional intelligence, always knowing when someone needed comfort. Diana's artistic talents were already drawing attention, her drawings displaying a sophistication unusual for her age. "They're remarkable children," their principal had said during a parent-teacher conference. "It's rare to see such a combination of intelligence and emotional maturity in children so young." Catherine had smiled, knowing that every compliment about her children validated her decision 5 years ago. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when she collapsed into bed exhausted, days when coordinating 4 different activities seemed impossible, and moments when she wished she had someone to share both the joys and difficulties. But Catherine had built a support system. Her clinic staff, Mrs. Parker, other parents from school, and her neighbors all pitched in to create a community around her family. The children knew about their father only in the most basic terms, that he was a successful businessman who wasn't part of their lives. Catherine kept his magazines and news appearances away from them, wanting them to form their own identities without the shadow of their father's fame. One evening, as Catherine helped Diana with her art project, while the boys built an elaborate Lego structure nearby, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. 5 heads bent in concentration, working together yet independently, each pursuing their interests while remaining connected. This was her real success story, not the thriving clinic or the comfortable life she built, but these 4 amazing children who carried within them the best of both their parents. The clinic's success had brought unexpected attention. Medical journals wanted to feature her innovative approach to pediatric care, and she'd been invited to speak at conferences. Catherine carefully managed these opportunities, always conscious of maintaining her privacy and protecting her children from unwanted publicity. She developed a reputation for her expertise in treating multiple births, her personal experience adding depth to her professional knowledge. Other parents of twins, triplets, and even the occasional quadruplets sought her out, finding comfort in a doctor who truly understood their challenges. What Catherine didn't know was that her carefully constructed world was about to intersect with her past. The city's biggest children's charity was planning their annual gala, and as one of the leading pediatricians in the field, her presence would be expected. It would be the first time in 5 years that her path might cross with James's, and she had no way of knowing how this encounter would shake the foundations of both their lives. The children were growing more perceptive each day. Recently, Alex had asked why their family photos didn't include a dad like his friends' photos did. Charlie had wondered why they had their mother's last name instead of matching the name on the big tech company building downtown. Diana had noticed that they all had their father's deep brown eyes and slight dimple when they smiled. Catherine knew she couldn't protect them from the truth forever, nor did she want to. She'd raised them with honesty and openness, and someday they would need to know their full story. She just hadn't expected that day to come so soon. As she tucked them into bed that night, watching their peaceful faces, so much like their father's, Catherine felt a mix of pride and apprehension. She'd built something beautiful from what could have been a tragedy, but life had a way of coming full circle. The next chapter of their story was approaching, and it would test everything she'd worked to protect. The Grand Plaza Hotel sparkled with elegant decorations for the annual Children's Healthcare Gala. Catherine adjusted her simple navy blue evening gown, a far cry from the designer dresses she used to wear at such events. Her presence tonight wasn't about glamour. She was here as one of the city's leading pediatricians, invited to speak about her clinic's innovative approach to family care. "Dr. Reynolds, your children are settled in for movie night," Mrs. Parker texted. Catherine smiled, imagining her 4 little ones cuddled up in their pajamas, probably negotiating which film to watch. These rare evenings out always came with a hint of guilt, but she knew the importance of representing her clinic at such events. The ballroom hummed with conversation and soft music. Wealthy donors mingled with medical professionals, all united by the cause of children's healthcare. Catherine moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, discussing her work with interested benefactors. She'd learned to navigate these waters on her own terms, earning respect for her expertise rather than her former connection to wealth. Then she heard it, that familiar laugh that used to fill their home. James stood across the room, surrounded by admirers as usual. He'd aged well, his hair now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, but something was different. The young model, Lily, wasn't by his side tonight. Catherine's heart didn't race like it used to at the sight of him. Instead, she felt a strange calm, secure in the life she built. She turned her attention back to her conversation with a hospital board member about expanding pediatric services. The evening progressed smoothly until it was time for the children's choir performance, a highlight of every year's gala. The doors opened and a group of young performers filed in, including a class from her children's school. Catherine's breath caught as she recognized Alex, Ben, Charlie, and Diana among them. Mrs. Parker had mentioned a last-minute choir practice but hadn't said anything about a performance. The Quadruplets stood in their matching school uniforms, looking adorably professional. They'd begged to join the choir months ago, and Catherine had agreed, never connecting it to this event. As the children began to sing, a hush fell over the crowd. Catherine watched her four treasures, their faces glowing under the elegant chandeliers. Alex stood tall and confident, Ben swayed slightly to the music, Charlie smiled his heart-melting smile, and Diana's clear voice carried the melody. That's when she felt it, James's presence nearby. He'd moved closer to watch the performance, and she could pinpoint the exact moment he noticed them. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, his eyes widening as they darted between the four identical faces on stage. The children were unmistakably his. They had his eyes, his smile, even his way of tilting their heads when concentrating. At 5 years old, they were living mirrors of his younger self. The song ended, and applause filled the room. Catherine's children beamed with pride, scanning the crowd until they spotted her. "Mom," they called out in near-perfect unison, waving enthusiastically. She smiled and waved back, aware of James's stunned gaze now fixed on her. The choir filed out for their next performance in another room, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people connected the dots. The Quadruplets' existence was no longer a private matter. "They're mine." James's voice came from behind her, a statement rather than a question. Catherine turned to face him, noting the mix of shock, anger, and wonder in his expression. "Yes," she replied simply. "Alex, Ben, Charlie, and Diana." 5 years, he said, his voice tight with emotion. "You've raised them for 5 years without." "You made your choice, James," Catherine interrupted gently. "I made mine." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Lily's name, but he didn't answer. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The gossip columns had been right about trouble in paradise. "They're beautiful," he managed, his eyes drawn to the doorway where the children had disappeared. "They're so." "They are," Catherine agreed. "They're kind, brilliant, and very loved." The evening became a blur of careful navigation. Catherine stayed for her scheduled speech about pediatric care, expertly deflecting personal questions. James remained in the ballroom, looking lost in thought, occasionally pulling out his phone to search for news articles he must have missed about quadruplets born to his ex-wife. When the children returned for the finale, they were met with even more attention than before. Catherine watched James watching them, saw him notice how Alex helped straighten Ben's tie, how Charlie offered Diana a tissue when she sneezed, how they functioned as a unit while maintaining their individual personalities. After the performance, Catherine gathered her children, who were buzzing with excitement about their surprise for her. "Did you like our songs, Mom?" Diana asked, while the boys talked over each other about their favorite parts. "You were all wonderful," Catherine assured them, helping them with their coats. She could feel James hovering nearby, uncertain whether to approach. The children, absorbed in their post-performance excitement, didn't notice the man standing a few feet away, their father, a stranger who shared their DNA. As they headed toward the exit, Alex suddenly stopped and looked back, his eyes meeting James's. There was a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or just childhood curiosity. Then Diana tugged at her brother's hand and the moment passed. The ride home was filled with chatter about the performance, the fancy ballroom, and the incredible dessert table they'd been allowed to visit afterward. Catherine listened to their happy voices, knowing that tonight had changed everything. Their carefully protected world had collided with the past, and the ripples would soon become waves. Later, after the children were asleep, Catherine sat in her quiet kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold before her. Her phone showed several missed calls from James's number and one text message, "We need to talk." She looked at the family photos covering her refrigerator, birthday parties, first days of school, holiday celebrations, all featuring the five of them, complete without him. Yet she knew her children deserved to know their father, and James, despite his past choices, deserved to know his children. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and complicated decisions. But tonight, Catherine allowed herself to feel proud, not just of her accomplished children, but of the strength she found within herself to build this life. Whatever came next, that strength would see them through. What she didn't know was that across town, James sat in his empty penthouse, surrounded by wealth, but feeling poorer than ever as he stared at a hastily snapped photo of four small faces that looked just like his own, singing their hearts out under the gleaming lights of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The morning after the gala dawned with a sense of inevitability. Catherine sat at her kitchen counter, watching her children eat breakfast, their normal morning chaos somehow more precious now that she knew everything was about to change. "Mom, can we have our choir practice today?" Diana asked, carefully arranging her cereal into patterns. Before Catherine could answer, her phone lit up with another message from James. She'd ignored his calls last night, but his latest text was simple: "Please. Coffee at the park near your clinic, just to talk." The children's weekend routine continued as normal. Mrs. Parker arrived to take them to their swimming lessons, unaware of the previous night's earth-shattering revelation. As Catherine watched them pile into the minivan, each carrying their bright blue swim bags, she finally replied to James, 2 p.m. The coffee cart by the playground. Her clinic was quiet on weekends, but she went in anyway, needing the familiar environment to gather her thoughts. The walls lined with children's artwork, including several masterpieces by her own four, reminded her of everything she built on her own. At precisely 2 p.m., she spotted James approaching the park bench. He traded his usual designer suit for casual clothes, looking more like the man she'd first fallen in love with years ago. The expensive watch and perfectly styled hair were the only remnants of his billionaire status. "You look well," he said, handing her a coffee. He still remembered how she liked it. "James," she acknowledged, accepting the cup. "I assume you have questions." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early days when he was struggling with difficult coding problems. "Questions?" "Catherine, I have 4 children I knew nothing about for 5 years. Questions doesn't begin to cover it." "You made it clear you wanted a new life," she replied evenly. "I gave you exactly that. But then my children too." His voice rose slightly, then he caught himself, glancing around the park. "I had a right to know." "Did you?" Catherine asked quietly. "You left me for a younger woman, served me divorce papers on our anniversary. Tell me, James, what would you have done if you'd known about the pregnancy? Stay out of obligation. Fight for custody to maintain your image." He fell silent, watching a family walk past with their dog. "Lily and I separated 3 months ago," he said finally. "She wanted children. I kept saying I wasn't ready. Ironic, isn't it?" Catherine felt no satisfaction from his admission. "The children are happy, James. They're thriving. Alex is already showing leadership skills that remind me of you. Ben spends hours solving puzzles that would challenge most adults. Charlie has your old ability to win people over, and Diana, she sees the world in such unique ways." James listened intently, drinking in every detail about his children. "They're incredible," he said softly. "Last night, watching them perform, I've never felt anything like it." "They are incredible," Catherine agreed. "Which is why whatever happens next has to be about them, not us. Not your guilt, not my past hurt, just what's best for 4 5-year-olds who've never known their father." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they talked, working through 5 years of unspoken words. James showed her pictures of the children he'd managed to capture on his phone during the performance. She told him about their first steps, their words, their personalities. "I want to be part of their lives," he said finally. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try. I'll do whatever you think is best. Therapy, parenting classes, anything. I'll sign whatever agreements you want about keeping them out of the media." Catherine studied his face, seeing genuine pain and longing there. "It won't be simple. They're old enough to ask questions, to have feelings about this. We'll need to take it slowly, handle it carefully." "I understand," he nodded. "I can wait. I don't want to miss any more of their lives." As they talked, Catherine's phone buzzed with pictures from Mrs. Parker, the children at their swimming lesson, all four doing perfect streamlines underwater. James's eyes lit up when she showed him. "They're natural athletes too," she explained. "They get that from your side of the family." The conversation shifted to practical matters. James had already called his lawyers not to fight but to set up trust funds for each child. Catherine listened as he outlined his plans, noting how different this James was from the man who'd walked away 5 years ago. "The media will find out," she said. "Your quadruplets will be big news." "I'll handle it," he promised. "My PR team can manage the story, keep the focus off the children. I don't want them exposed to that circus." As the afternoon wore on, they crafted the beginnings of a plan. They would start with a child psychologist's guidance, introduce James gradually, always following the children's comfort levels. He would meet them first as a friend of their mother's, giving everyone time to adjust. "There's something else you should know," Catherine said. "Remember how you always said you wanted to cure diseases, back before you switched to consumer tech? Alex told his teacher he wants to be a doctor like me, but also invent new medicines. Ben wants to build robots that help sick people." James smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And Charlie and Diana?" "Charlie says he'll be a doctor for people's feelings, his words for a psychiatrist. Diana wants to paint murals in children's hospitals to make them less scary." The proud, pained look on James's face spoke volumes. "They're already better people than I ever was," he said softly. As they prepared to leave, James hesitated. "Catherine, thank you, not just for today, but for raising them so well, for being strong enough to do it alone. I know I don't deserve forgiveness." "This isn't about forgiveness," she interrupted gently. "It's about 4 children who deserve to know where they come from. Just don't hurt them, James. They're resilient, but they're still little." He nodded solemnly. "I promise. Whatever happened between us, I won't let them down." Walking back to her car, Catherine felt lighter somehow. The secret she carried for 5 years was out, and while the road ahead would be complicated, she knew she'd made the right decision. The children deserved the chance to know their father, and James deserved the chance to know the amazing people their children were becoming. What neither of them realized was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would reshape all their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. The real test of their newfound understanding was yet to come. The conversation shifted to practical matters. James had already called his lawyers not to fight but to set up trust funds for each child. Catherine listened as he outlined his plans, noting how different this James was from the man who'd walked away 5 years ago. "The media will find out," she said. "Your quadruplets will be big news." "I'll handle it," he promised. "My PR team can manage the story, keep the focus off the children. I don't want them exposed to that circus." As the afternoon wore on, they crafted the beginnings of a plan. They would start with a child psychologist's guidance, introduce James gradually, always following the children's comfort levels. He would meet them first as a friend of their mother's, giving everyone time to adjust. "There's something else you should know," Catherine said. "Remember how you always said you wanted to cure diseases, back before you switched to consumer tech? Alex told his teacher he wants to be a doctor like me, but also invent new medicines. Ben wants to build robots that help sick people." James smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And Charlie and Diana?" "Charlie says he'll be a doctor for people's feelings, his words for a psychiatrist. Diana wants to paint murals in children's hospitals to make them less scary." The proud, pained look on James's face spoke volumes. "They're already better people than I ever was," he said softly. As they prepared to leave, James hesitated. "Catherine, thank you, not just for today, but for raising them so well, for being strong enough to do it alone. I know I don't deserve forgiveness." "This isn't about forgiveness," she interrupted gently. "It's about 4 children who deserve to know where they come from. Just don't hurt them, James. They're resilient, but they're still little." He nodded solemnly. "I promise. Whatever happened between us, I won't let them down." Walking back to her car, Catherine felt lighter somehow. The secret she carried for 5 years was out, and while the road ahead would be complicated, she knew she'd made the right decision. The children deserved the chance to know their father, and James deserved the chance to know the amazing people their children were becoming. What neither of them realized was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would reshape all their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. The real test of their newfound understanding was yet to come. James felt tears prick his eyes. Yes to all of it, I promise. Catherine watched the interaction with mixed emotions. The past months had been challenging, dealing with the media attention when the story broke, helping the children process the truth, navigating her own complex feelings. But seeing the healing taking place before her eyes made it worth it. Later that afternoon, as the children played on the nearby playground, James and Catherine sat watching them. "They're giving me more of a chance than I deserve," he said quietly. "Children have an amazing capacity for love," Catherine replied. "They get that from being loved themselves." James nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in her words. "I know we can't go back to how things were, Catherine, but maybe we can build something new, something better, for them. That's all I ever wanted," she said softly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, the family gathered their belongings. The children were tired but happy, each having spent special time with their father. "Same time next weekend?" James asked hopefully. "Soccer practice is at 10, Alex informed him. You could come watch." "I'll be there," James promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As they walked to their separate cars, Diana ran back to give James one last hug. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, before running back to their siblings. James stood rooted to the spot, those 4 simple words healing something broken inside him. Catherine caught his eye and smiled, a genuine smile that spoke of forgiveness and hope. This wasn't a fairy tale ending with the parents reuniting romantically. Instead, it was something more realistic and perhaps more beautiful, 2 people setting aside their past to create a healthy future for their children. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they would face them together as a family redefined by love, understanding, and second chances.